Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Thanks for listening to the show. Join your hosts, Bill Alvstad and Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, hi, Seahawks fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers. We're here to talk Seahawks football, the NFL draft, specifically the interior offensive line prospects in this class. It's an interesting and somewhat complex conversation, as it is always every year. But this year just seems like there's more offensive tackle prospects that played offensive tackle in college that will now project inside. It makes this conversation a little bit more nuanced than it otherwise would be, just because we're going to be talking about a lot of different prospects, a lot of different skill sets, how they fit, the length of prospects, how that impacts where they might project, and all of that. Luckily, Keith is with us because he kind of dives into this stuff more so than any other position group. So let's just get this thing started. Welcome in, Keith.
Yeah, this is my fun place. I don't know why I started liking offensive linemen and scouting that and learning all the little nuances of the position, but I've just that became my thing back in my writing days. And so it's a lot of fun for me. I don't know if it's the most exciting position group for everyone, but it is such a massive need for the Seahawks this year. They have got to figure out what they're going to do on the interior of the offensive line. Those three positions, right guard, left guard, and center, were the Achilles heel of the 2024 Seahawks. So now that we're into 2025, they have got to fix this. I think they need at least two new players. They're probably going to get one in free agency and one early in the draft. And so, it's worth looking at all of these guys and trying to get an idea of what's out there.
So a couple of things I wanted to kind of lead the conversation off with, just we can kind of set the table here, in that this is the first time in a little while that it seems like we have clarity on the type of offense we want to be, the type of offensive coaching staff that we've hired, a blocking plan in place. And we've got certain players in our existing roster that kind of fit in that system and scheme. That John Schneider came on his radio show this last week and indicated that is a primary focus of Seattle now, is to develop what we currently have better than we have in the past, as well as take a look at outside free agents and the draft. You know, we've always believed, at least you and I and most people believe, that developing players through the draft is the way to do it, I think, in the NFL, as far as a long-term way you build a roster. So let's kind of incorporate all that into this conversation, and maybe we can spend just a minute talking about a couple of the players and prospects on our current roster that you believe would transition into this new scheme and kind of be maybe even better fits for this current system.
Yeah, so there's really three players that you're looking at when you're talking about developing guys, and maybe looking at the guys that you have internally. And you're talking about Christian Haynes, who was last year's extremely disappointing third round pick. Satoa Lamea, who is last year's surprising in that he actually played sixth round pick, and then Olu Oluwatimi, who was the year before's fifth round pick.
And he view Michael Jarrell in that conversation.
I'm pushed Michael Jarrell out at tackle. He's a tackle prospect.
So. I forgot we were just talking about interior guys. Okay.
So it's really those three guys. And I think that from what we saw last year, there's reason to think that none of these guys are going to be guys that you want on your offensive line long term. Maybe Haynes has more upside if a new coaching staff can get some of it out of him, because the old one certainly something was not right, because his college tape was so much better than anything he ever did in the pros, and then he just couldn't get on the field because the coaches didn't seem to want him on the field. And
I think he does have some athletic upside that projects better in an outside stretch situation.
Yeah. So there's reason to be to have optimism there. Oluwatimi lacks size and power and strength in terms of that stuff, but he moves laterally well for a center, and so perhaps there's something that you can work with for an outside zone scheme with him, but he's always going to struggle in pass blocking situations. And then Lumea is still a project. Like, he was a tackle in college and kind of got thrust in to the lineup and looked okay at times, looked really bad at times. But, there's a lot of development that needs to happen before anyone makes a final decision on him. But at the same time, you can't go into this next season expecting those three guys to be your interior. Not and expect to win. Going in with those three guys as your interior offensive line, like your starters, is asking for you to be stuck in rebuild mode for another year. So I think that what we're looking at is, they want to develop those guys, but they also need starters. They need guys that can come in and just automatically improve what is their Achilles heel.
Cool. Okay. So as part of this conversation, you can't completely ignore free agency, but we're not trying to really solve anything right now. This podcast specifically is talking about guys in the draft, and I think we'll keep the vast majority of the conversation there. I think ideally you want Seattle to kind of solve maybe one of these issues in free agency. And one of the prospects I really like is Drew Dahlman, the offensive center out of Atlanta. Just kind of really fits very well this scheme and what we want to do. Kind of an undersized guy, 6'3", 286, coming out of Stanford in 2021. He's put on a little bit more weight than that, playing weight in the NFL, but he projects really well. There's a few other guys. It's fairly poor, out there. Normally, if guys are reaching free agency, there's a reason for that, especially interior offensive linemen and offensive tackles just in the NFL, because they're just such a short supply. Demand outweighs the ability to create positions for them. So it's just one of those deals, and you've got to try your best, I think, to maybe go after a guy like that, depending on how they really want to allocate positional funds, to the interior offensive line. I think it makes a lot of sense, but they may view Oluwatimi with a lot of upside and a better scheme fit in this system, and they may not take a look at it as such a high priority as maybe we do other positions of need that we currently haven't really talked about yet because we haven't reached the free agency conversations in earnest.
If you look at the free agency list for interior guys, I think it's just based on who's available. You'd think CX would go after a center in free agency and a guard in the draft, because you mentioned Drew Dahlman, but there's a couple of other guys here. Liam Eichenberg from the Dolphins and Josh Myers from the Packers, all guys that are around 27, all guys that played most of their team's snaps last year, and all guys that, weren't break the bank expensive because they're coming off their rookie contract. And so they're not guys that are expecting necessarily massive contracts at this stage, especially, you play center, you're never going to get that big of a contract. But yeah, these are all guys that you could look at and say, hey, that could be a starter. That could be someone we could come in, drop in, and be a day one starter, and not have that be one of your problem areas in 2025. And so, I agree with you. Dahlman's kind of the better of all of that.
Well, if you're going to use Pro Football Focus just as kind of a barometer, not saying it's perfect, I'm just saying it is a barometer. It's one of those things that we can measure. Drew Dahlman graded out at 86.6, which was fantastic. He had 454 snaps in outside zone specifically for that grade. And you go down, and Ben Barch is another center that's potentially there, 79.5. You had mentioned Josh Myers. Josh Myers actually graded out at 50.7 in an outside zone blocking.
Yeah, but they didn't do much of it. That's more of a he was a significantly better pass blocker. And they do a lot more. They just didn't do a lot of zone stretch. And so that's kind of why I'm like, I don't know if that's particularly meaningful.
Mm-hmm. They may end up going with the seasoned vet option just to give them a year or two to buy some time. A guy like Ryan Kelly, 34 years old, might be a guy that they might look to do that. That would be less expensive and just kind of solve it for a year, a season or so. Okay, so we'll get into that conversation a little bit more as we get closer to free agency in a few weeks. And by the way, too, the NFL Combine is this next week. Can you believe that, Keith? It just creeped up on us very, very quickly. So what are you looking for specifically in a Klint Kubiak wide zone system, Keith? Is it just athleticism? Is it quick feet? Is it, the use of leverage? Is it just being smart? What distinguishes that system and the type of profile you're looking for in a player?
Yeah. So you end up needing athleticism. That's kind of what you look for. Having that just pure straight ahead power doesn't help you as much in this system because you want to get the defensive lineman moving laterally. And if, they go to your outside shoulder, you just keep pushing them and you try and get them moving sideways. And if they go to your inside shoulder, you turn and seal them on the inside and let basically you create the hole right there because you kind of stop everyone from that side of the line from continuing to move over. And so it becomes a situation where you need guys that are quick on their feet, that can, rotate quickly, that have good, good agility, good, the ability to turn and set their feet in different sets and that kind of stuff. But you also need guys that have, some pop to them because you can't just be passive on this. Once you get your hands on guys, you need to wash them out of the play by pushing them wide and getting them outside. And sometimes you have to move a guy 10, 12 yards outside. And it's different than trying to push them straight back that far, which is what this entire scheme was created to do, was to be allowed, you can create holes by moving guys laterally rather than trying to push them back. And, but yeah, you need guys that can do that. If you don't have the athleticism, then you're just going to be too plodding as you try and push the guy outside. And by then the play's been blown up. You've got to be able to get them moving laterally. And so I'm looking for guys with a really good balance, that you can't lean on people in this scheme. If you're leaning on people, they're just going to stop moving and you're going to fall down and they're just going to go up and make a tackle. So technique wise, you got to have really good balance. You got to have solid feet. And you've got to be able to move in space.
So I don't know how you kind of wanted to approach this because we have a lot of tackles that are kind of at the top of the draft in the first couple of rounds that are projected to kind of move inside. We could just kind of run through some names: Wyatt Millum, Armand Membo, Jack Nelson, Logan Brown, Clay Webb, Gray Zabel. Mm-hmm. Kevin Banks, even Connor Colby, Jared Wilson, the center from, and he played a little bit of tackle at Georgia. Luke Kandra, who I really like. Will Campbell, Josh Connerly Jr., Donovan Jackson, all played tackle in college that project kind of to move inside. I know that not all of those guys kind of fit the scheme. They may have shorter stature, shorter arms. The length just isn't there, and that's kind of why they project. But let's talk about guys that actually fit. Kind of what
So
we're
when you look at this, one of the things that came out of last year's draft was the first true guard prospect to come off the board was Christian Haynes in the third round. All the other guys that were selected as guard earlier in that all played tackle in college. And I think that that's something that you're going to see continue, not just this year, but for the future, because the guys don't have the length to be an NFL tackle, what they do still have typically is quick enough feet and stuff. They have that. They tend to be more athletic than college guards, because college guards tend to just be more plodding, and they're there because they're huge and take up space more so than being true athletes. And so, a lot of these guys that are tackles in college, some in a decade or year ago, they might go as fourth, fifth rounds just because they don't have the length to play tackle in the pros. But now teams are looking at them and making that switch to guard right away, instantaneously, and so there's more value. And so, we're seeing a lot. You're seeing a lot more of that. You'd mentioned Kevin Banks in there at 6'4", 320. Honestly, I think he can play tackle. I know 6'4", people are like, but I think he's gonna have the footwork. His footwork is really, really good. But then you look at guys like Membao. He's also 6'4", but he's got shorter arms, and he could even move all the way inside to center. But that guy moves really nice.
And he's a lot lighter too. What is he? 305, 310, something like that. 33-inch arms though. That's why he's going to move in. Those guys just can't exist in the NFL at that length. He did give up a little bit more pressures and sacks compared to some other options, but everyone seems to have him, close to the top of the center and guard market in the draft.
You have him at 305. I've got him at 332. Was the 305 at the Senior Bowl?
He measured actually 300 pounds at the Senior Bowl.
Wow.
And he's listed at 309 on Draft Buzz.
Membao? I'm looking at it right here. It says 332. Weird. Whatever. But yeah, I mean, he's a guy that I think is really interesting. If the Seahawks are going to draft a guy at 18 or anywhere down into the 20s, if they trade back a couple times to come in and fix one of those O-line spots on day one, he's a guy that's really, really interesting to me. I like the way he moves. He's really powerful. He's just doesn't have the length to be an NFL tackle, and so comes inside and will just move people. And I think he would going to end up being a really good looking pro.
I like a prospect like this because it seems like with his skill set, he's kind of nasty in the way that he finishes in the run game. He's got that mentality. He seems to be able to take on speed rushers, right away, at least when he was playing outside. Stout upper body, quick steps, but that power, but also comfortable working into the second level. And the agility for him seems to be impressive. That shows that he can kind of transition and play both schemes. How attractive is it for the Seahawks, and specifically for this coaching staff on the offensive side of the ball, to be able to have a player that could play both gap and outside zone? Like, will they run both in that scheme, or is it just exclusively zone type blocking schemes that they're looking to match up?
Well, nobody runs exclusively one thing anymore. But in this particular group, I expect with this coaching staff for it to be very little gap and a lot of zone. And so what you end up with that is it's mainly just because you're trying not to be predictable. You're trying to like guys start to cheat a little bit towards things so they can get to a spot where they won't be pushed, and so then you turn around and you come back with a power run right there, and you just blow them off the ball, and so that's why you can't just run one thing, but it's going to be a lot. It's going to be probably close to 80%, and that's why I'm really only looking at guys that do the zone stretch stuff well, because you're only looking at the gap power stuff in order to be your changeup, just to keep defenders honest. And so in that sense, you don't need the guys that just excel at it, because they're not going to be using it in that capacity. But you're right about, Memba being able to do both, and is one of those guys that can, which makes him attractive to more teams, right? If you are one of those teams that, wants to run gap power, he's on your board, and he's on your board high. And if you're one of the teams that want to run, zone stretch, he's on your board, and he's on your board high, which is going to mean that he's probably going to go sooner than I want him to go. Because I'd love to see him drop and be available at like 27 and have the Seahawks drop back a couple times, get some extra draft picks, and still get him. But I don't think that happens.
Does it depend on whether teams view him as a guard versus a center?
Yes. Centers go, unless they're special, centers go later. They just don't.
So what's the next player you want to talk about?
The next player I would talk about is really similar in terms of playing tackle, gonna move inside, and that would be Gray Zabel out of North Dakota State. He's 6'5", 316, but honestly, it doesn't. 6'5" sounds like he's going to be long, but his arms aren't there. He's going to be a center at the next level. I think pretty much everyone's going to view him that way. He excelled at tackle because he played, what we used to call Division II, the FCS. And okay, so he's got
32 and an eighth inch arms.
Yeah, he just doesn't have. There's no length there as a tackle. But he is a fluid mover. Like, he moves almost like a tight end at times. Like, you can see his footwork looking really nice. He's great in space. If you like, when you could go back and you watch them, when he would pull, he could come all the way across the line from left tackle and be a lead blocker. Plays great in space, sets guys up. I like his game a lot. I think he's going to be a center at the next level, and a very, very good one.
Yeah, I would love that pick for the Seahawks. I just don't know exactly where you need to be to get him. Seems like he's moving up, and he probably won't be there at 50. He might be, but chances are he's probably going to go in the 30s somewhere. Maybe even creep up into the first round. You just never know. The guy, you remember Graham Barton, right? And we talked a lot about Graham Barton in the draft in 2024 as a guy that came in and blew up the Senior Bowl in a similar fashion. And Gray Zabel, I think, did more than Graham Barton did to kind of help his draft stock and show teams that he can compete, even at all, 4 or 5 spots on the offensive line with players that came from bigger schools and had stiffer competition. And he just kind of held his own and really showed that he was one of the best offensive linemen there at the Senior Bowl. Seahawks love that stuff. I mean, that's kind of their pocket. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if he ended up being a top 25 pick, and it wouldn't surprise me if he'd be at 50 when the Seahawks play. I think we're going to get more information here after the combine, and we'll see where teams are kind of settling in on how they view him. And I think that he's probably going to be kind of a coveted player just from the lack of true talent at the position.
Yeah. This is one of the things that you start looking at these interior guys, and how many of them played tackle. The answer is a lot. And this guy would be an outstanding scheme fit for Seattle, like a guy that can be in a heavy zone system that gets to the combos and really moves players. And yeah, I would love that pick. Yeah.
If we're going to stay with center, I don't know if you want to, but the next
Sure.
guy that I would really like to talk about is Jared Wilson out of Georgia, who actually played center in college at 6'3", 310, 4'8", 40. Straight line speed doesn't matter too much, but it does show his ability to get out in space and run. And in check this out, Keith. In high school, where he was a lot lighter, he ran a 10.91 seconds in the 100 meters. If you can believe that.
Seriously?
As an offensive center. Yeah.
That,
well, he didn't play center in high school, but he played like a quarterback, I think, something like that.
Oh, that's crazy.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
I see him as the best run blocking center and probably one of the best zone blocking centers if you take Gray Zabel out of the equation, just because teams are going to have to figure out the level of competition thing with Zabel. I get he showed up at the Senior Bowl and he had a great week, but the film is the film. Mm-hmm. And you gotta figure that part out. But this guy's proven in the SEC at Georgia, doing it all the time. And so I like the IQ there, the fit for the scheme. And what I'm really interested to see what you think of Jared Wilson.
Oh, I like
he
Jared
might go
Wilson
in the draft.
Jared Wilson we do a lot of tackles inside projection because we're looking for that athleticism. And there's not a lot of guys that come out with, that were true centers in college that have the athleticism to project well at the next level. And he is one of those that does. And in a large part because it's Georgia. And so when you start looking at this, you've got 3 interior offensive linemen from Georgia, all that'll probably go in the first 4 rounds. And so this is a program that, they don't have to put every great giant athlete at tackle because they get so many of them. They can put good athletes on the inside too. And that's part of why, you're looking at him and you're like, okay, this guy could go pretty high. I think he's probably more like a 3rd round pick, maybe the end of round 2. I think that overall he's a guy that I like the way that he moves and he blocks. I think in run blocking, you're right. He's fantastic. He's makes me a little worried in some of his pass sets.
I don't know. In pass sets, dude, he allowed 5 pressures on the year and 0 sacks. He's one of the best zone scheme blockers in the country. I think I don't want to say, just in passing, because I think that he does do a lot in the run game for them. Obviously, that's just the system that they operate in. But I thought that, comparably to some of the other prospects that are out there, I think he looks pretty good. So.
Oh yeah. I mean, I just,
where do you think he's going to go in the draft though?
I think he's going to go late 2, early 3. So somewhere probably 70, 75.
Right in the middle of an area where Seattle doesn't currently have a pick.
Yeah.
So if you're really targeting a guy like this, and we can just talk draft strategy just for a second. If he's your guy and you want to come away from the draft with a player, either Jared Wilson himself or a player like Jared Wilson, what are you going to have to do to manipulate the draft to come away with this player? Do you pick him early at 50, or do you try to generate a trade that drops you down a little bit and risk maybe another team coming up and getting him? What do you do?
I think instead you go the other direction. Instead of being at 50 and trying to drop down, you take your pick at is it 82, and you try and move up. And so you package that with a 5th round pick, and you try and get yourself up to a point where you can take him when he's still available. And so you just kind of watch and you see him drop. And when you get to a point where you're like, all right, I can't trust he's going to drop much further, then you pull the trigger on a trade. You move up, 10 spots and grab him off the board there. And I think it's a more likely situation for Seattle, just simply because moving back is dangerous when you have a certain guy targeted, or, like, oh, we have to get an interior offensive lineman, because if you move back 5 spots and then 3 of the next 5 picks are interior offensive linemen, you may have just gotten yourself in a lot of trouble, and now you're stuck. And so you're better off to take another pick and move up, from below, rather than trying to move back from 50 into that range.
One of the things that Seahawks fans can look for too is Seattle moving off that 18th pick, going back into the mid-20s, picking up an additional 3rd round pick. That would give them some ammunition then, really, to stay in the 80s where they're currently at, have an additional pick in that range that they can move around with. That would also work.
So you go from having 18, 50, and 82 to having 27, 50, 71, and 89 in the top 100. And so you end up with more talent that way. And, fans get disappointed when Seattle moves down in the first round, because they're like, oh, you're missing out on a blue chip player or that kind of stuff. But sometimes it's about acquiring multiple, starter level talent at different positions, so that way you can compete more. And it can be frustrating, but I get it. But as far as strategy goes, if you can get that other player getting an opportunity by moving down, and it takes a couple of other trades, but then you end up with an extra pick in the early 70s that you can go and get a guy like Jared Wilson. Then you end up, doing some really nice things for your, for your roster.
So I want to keep the center conversation going, but I also don't want to pass over some guard options that we're going to talk about, and we're 30 minutes in. I did want to talk about Seth McLaughlin, the Ohio State center, just for a second, because he's a guy that ruptured his Achilles late in the season. He had to kind of pass, obviously, over the bowl season, the Senior Bowl, which he had an invite to, and so on and so forth. Seems like he would be an amazing fit, even better for me than Jared Wilson, but he was injured. He's unavailable. He's probably going to take the vast majority of his rookie season to continue to rehab that Achilles and so forth. But as far as a prospect is concerned, he would be a great fit in this system. And I just wanted to see how you view a prospect that is injured so late in the season, that really had a high grade potentially coming out, and now where does he go? Where does he go in the draft? Is he a true fit for Seattle? Would Seattle be interested in a player like that? And what pick would they use to acquire somebody like Seth McLaughlin?
Well, I think John Snyder is going to be interested in finding elite talent anywhere. And so this is one of those picks where you're right. He's essentially going to redshirt his rookie year, because he got hurt so late in the year that he's probably not going to be ready for the first of the season, which means he's going to miss all of the off-season program, all of the learning that you have to go through in all the mini camps and that kind of stuff, all of training camp. There's so much learning that must happen for a rookie, especially on the offensive line. And he's going to miss all of that. So even once he's healthy, let's say he gets, his knee is healthy and he's ready to roll out there, at week 4, to do what? He hasn't really learned all the stuff that guys spend, weeks and weeks working on, before their rookie season, in order to get themselves ready, to be an NFL offensive lineman. And he won't have done that. So, basically you're looking at, okay, now you're trying to have him pick that stuff up with the second team. And how long does it take in terms of practices before he's ready to jump out there? Week 10, week 12. And so, you're looking at losing most of that season. Well, that's going to affect his, where he goes in the draft, because very few teams can afford to spend a 3rd round pick on a guy that for certain is not going to impact your football team this coming year. And, most coaches and GMs are too worried about, job security to be like, don't worry, it'll work out. It'll work out the following year when this guy's great. They're like, no, our third round pick, we need an impact player who can come in and help us now. And yeah, I mean, that's when you end up like making that kind of business decision as a GM, and this guy ends up dropping. I think a guy that with his talent, if you can get him, let's say late round 4, early round 5, where he's going to redshirt for a year, but had he been healthy, he probably was a second round pick
and an instant starter for you.
Yeah. But he's not, you know what I mean? Like if he was healthy, that's where he would go. He'd be your day one starter at center. And so how do you weigh that? I think that, if you are a team that has, especially if the Seahawks can find a low cost, vet that they can, use to kick the center problem down the road a year, then absolutely that would be a great pick. Because basically,
if they were going to do somebody like,
Evan Brown,
mentioned,
they could bring Evan Brown back.
Somebody like that, right? And I was thinking of, not Josh Myers in the draft in free agency, but what was the other player? Ryan Kelly. I was thinking of Ryan Kelly.
Oh, Ryan Kelly was a great one.
Placehold that position for a year, still provide you with some really nice play in 2025, and then probably be off the roster going forward. Mm-hmm. A guy like Seth McLaughlin would be a good player. Okay, so let's go backwards and let's start talking about guard prospects that are going to be on Seattle's radar, starting in the first round even. Like, who would they consider? Why would they consider a guard in the first round? And then kind of go through maybe rounds 2 and 3 with some prospects that you think Seattle would have on their radar.
They would consider a guard in the first round simply because their guard talent deficient on the roster is just not good in any way. If you're going first round, that's all you can be like, yeah, go spend a first round pick on a guard and fix one of your biggest problems. Find me the guard prospect that's worth it. If you're not going to go with a guy like Membao, who's a tackle and you're moving him inside, as far as a true guard, you're looking at maybe Tyler Booker out of Alabama. But I don't know if he's a guy that you're spending a pick in the 20s on. I think he's, just his typical draft grade is going to be in the 30s. And so that's a guy that, but honestly,
but he's 20 years old. Like he's 20 years old.
He's 20
more of an
years
inside
old.
Zone or gap fit as far as just the way that he's played so far. But he's got so much agility and upside and athleticism that you could project him into a different. He's just at Alabama. That's not what they did. They didn't run a stretch outside zone, but he does have that projection. And I think that's why for a team like Seattle, he'd probably be graded a little later. I would assume, but if he's there at 18, if a guy like, who did we mention before that was, that I thought maybe got Kevin Banks, a guy that played tackle and that could move inside, but he could also play tackle for you. Like, how do they value those guys? Would they contemplate taking anybody at 18 or moving back to say 25? Is there somebody there that they would take? Would they consider even a guy like Membo, who we haven't talked about yet, or a guy like Donovan Jackson? Is that too early to contemplate him?
I think so. Because if you're taking a player at 18, you're taking a tackle. You're taking a guy that can play and will play tackle at the next level. Taking a guy that
signify if they did that, like let's just say it's Kelvin Banks, would that signify to you that they would be moving Abe Lucas inside to guard?
I'd have a hard time with that. Why would you move Abe Lucas? Who's got
you could prolong his career.
He's got the length and everything that you need at tackle. you're going to a player who isn't as long, and I don't like that. I'd say if you're going and you're picking a guy like Banks, because, or not Banks. Sorry, now I'm losing.
Sorry, we're jumping around a little bit.
No, yeah. Kevin Banks. There we go. If you're taking a guy like him, it's because you view him as a guy that can play left guard for you this year, and maybe left tackle for you later, or a guy that he's going to be your right guard, but if Abe Lucas's knee continues to make it so that he's not the player he was as a rookie, then eventually he moves outside and becomes your right tackle. Okay. So you're looking at a guy that, we're going to use him at guard, and he's going to be an improvement, and that's his role this year. But we see him as a tackle in a year or two. Gotcha. Otherwise, you're just not.
So really, there's nobody that you would necessarily consider as a true guard prospect in the first round.
Oh God, no, there is this.
Now, as you know, and in fact, Schneider had, his radio show this last week and talked about this. And previously he said guards are overrated, overdrafted, overpaid. He kind of clarified that remark a little bit this year. And he just kind of said, listen, that's the market. And supply and demand. That's where we're at. That's why. Are we going to overdraft or overpay a guard? Yeah, we've done it in the past. And he said, we'll probably likely do it again. It is what it is kind of his, at the end result of that conversation. So my question to you is, if the entire league has that similar view, do guards get pushed up into the first round anyway in this draft? And how does that impact Seattle?
I don't think there are any that warrant it. And that's not just, because they're a guard, so therefore, kick him down a round. It's more of the outside of places like Georgia, where they can have good athletes at guard. All the good athlete offensive linemen are tackles, and
it's so true, Keith.
I don't see the player worthy of a first round pick at guard.
I mean, Tyler Booker himself is ranked I'm just looking at Draft Buzz, is ranked as the 9th best overall offensive lineman, and he's the first true guard on their rankings. Everyone else is at the tackle, and then you have to go,
all the way down to 35 to get to Donovan Jackson. Right.
And Tate Ratledge is there at 13th overall from Georgia, and he's not a good scheme fit. And then you have to go to like Dylan Fairchild. You're getting into players that Anyway, it's not good. It's not good. So this may not.
This is the same situation that happened last year. I mean, the first true guard prospect that was a guard in college and was going to be a guard in the NFL that actually looked like a guy that was going to stick and be a starter level talent was Christian Haynes. It was a 3rd round pick. And then he did nothing as a rookie. So, we'll see.
Okay. So do you want to talk about a guy like Donovan Jackson? I think he's got one of the highest floors to me in the draft, and not the highest ceiling, maybe potentially, especially if you add all the offensive tackles that might move inside. But he does look like a day one starter at guard to me in the NFL, and I think he does have the size and the power to be diverse for you, but also can be, outside and stretch and so forth, and be able to anchor in the pass rush. He's a bigger prospect at 320 pounds, but I think he does still move well at 6'4", 320. I just looking at some thoughts from you.
Well, he does move move pretty well, but he moves like a guard.
No, I get that.
And
yeah, he runs a 5.2 40, and his short shuttle is 4.57. But he does have a 35-inch vertical. It does show that he's got a little bit of strength in his legs and athleticism.
Yeah, actually, I mean that would be the reason why I would look at him and be like, all right, that's something that you can work with, because of the vertical, it's like, how often is an offensive lineman jumping in the NFL? So people like kind of toss it away and don't really consider it. But but you're looking at, if you're think about this guy, he's lifting that 320 pound body that high into the air. The coordination that you have to have with the different muscles between your back and your glutes and your legs to create that. It's not just, one muscle group. And those are things that are nice. And so being able to that shows that he's got some athleticism there. I think he moves forward really well. And that he's a guy that's really built as a gap power guard. And I'm not as like sold on him as a zone, guy, but at the same time, like, I don't want to like completely undersell the fact that he has, athleticism there. It's some of these projections are hard because you don't see the opposing team or their college team use, the right scheme. And that's not a problem with the player. It's, just the team they're playing for. And so now it's a matter of how do they project, and, what can you see, and that kind of stuff. I do like him as a pass blocker. I like the way his base is wide. He's got great balance. He sinks back, into his set really nicely, mirrors well. So I think that he's going to have some value because he's not just a run blocker. Because a lot of times with guards, you start looking, you're like, oh, you've got guys on both sides of you, so make sure that they can run block, and then we'll worry about the pass blocking. But this is a guy that I think is an established pass blocker at this point. And then it just means can you take his skill set and teach him, the zone, the lateral movement kind of run blocking. Does he project and be able to use his skills and be as effective at doing that as he did, when moving forward? And, this is why Schneider and his team get paid a lot more than I do, because they have to make that projection, where I would sit back and be like, yeah, he's great for a different team. So at this stage of our conversation and kind of where we're at in the draft, do you want to talk about Membu at all? As a prospect? We kind of started with Membu. Okay. And I mean, he's a guy that, honestly, he's the guy I like most for Seattle if they go offensive line first round. He has got so much athleticism. He moves so well. He is an elite left tackle who's just not long enough to be a tackle. And the idea of having a guy with that much ability at guard. And the thing is that, if something happens to Abe Lucas and you have to slide him outside, you just got to give him some help against speed rushers, because he won't hold up against that on his own. He just doesn't have the length. It's too short of an angle for them, for them to get to the quarterback. But but if you had to in a pinch, you could put him at right tackle and he'll be great as long as you give him help against speed rushers. whether it be a tight end there to chip or have the running back, chip on their way out, anything like that in order to give the guy an opportunity to get his hands on a guy, because he doesn't have that length. I think he could be really good. So that's kind of the idea is you're going to have an elite guard, and your swing tackle who, you can have in there. You just know that you have to give them a little bit of protection, but you're going to do that to your swing tackle anyway, because they're not going to be all that good. Right, because that's why they're a swing tackle and not a starter. So
I think that
help anyway.
This guy comes in immediately and starts at right or left guard for you. He could even play center, I think, for you if that was his thing, and you could get that out of him. I think he's ideal zone blocking traits at either of those guard spots. I think he's got serious pop. You'd mentioned pop earlier as being an important trait for in this scheme. He brings the ability to pick up stunts and blitzes. He's got kind of a veteran savvy about him already, just because of the way that he plays, the processing speed, the athletic traits, the ability to get out, the nasty finishing that he does, like in run blocking is really impressive. He is my favorite lineman that would fit our scheme in the draft for me. And it's not really close. I do like Tyler Booker. I do like Donovan Jackson. I think those are safe picks. I just don't know where you'd have to get. I don't think they're going to be there at 50, but I don't think you can get them at 18 or want to get them at 18. So I think, if Seattle moves around a little bit, those could be options, I think, for them. But a player that I wouldn't mind them taking at 18, or if they move back a little bit, like to 21, 23, Armand Membu is a player that is not a sexy pick. Like Seattle, you're in the first round and you're going to draft a trench player just like we did last year. Well, if you take a look at winning the Super Bowl and those Super Bowl teams, and you take a look at Philadelphia, and you take a look at their offensive defensive lines, that's where they win games. And that's where
it's
teams,
also
once you
where
get in
they
the playoffs,
spend money
win
and
games.
spend draft capital is on the offense and defensive lines. That's it paid off. It's paid off, 2 Super Bowl champions in the last 5 years. Football games are won and lost at the line of scrimmage. It's not sexy. You want to see wide receivers and quarterbacks and that kind of stuff. But just go back to that game. If you can't protect your quarterback, it doesn't matter if they're Patrick Mahomes.
And these type of elite linemen are just not available in free agency. And if they are, they cost $25 million a year. You can get a guy like Armand Membu at pick 23, and he's going to cost you $3-4 million a year his first 4 years, and that 5th year is going to end up being $12 million. So that's a bargain for a player like that's going to be on your roster for 8 years, 8 seasons, 9 seasons. He's only 20 years old, 20.1 years old. He's not going to be 21 until this time next year, which is crazy. Now there's some other prospects. Why don't you just hand select what you want to talk about? We're kind of getting deep into the show and talk about the guys that you feel might be available a little later in the draft.
A little later in the draft. Because there's a couple of guys that I was ready to talk about, but I'm like, they're kind of in that same range that we've been talking about. Why not stick to Georgia, since I've already mentioned 3 of their offensive linemen, and talk about Ernest Green III. Is a guy that a lot of places have him listed as a tackle prospect. I think he ends up moving inside at the next level just because of the length issue, but he's got really good balance. And so, he's got a kind of body that you see as a tackle in terms of his balance and his footwork and that kind of stuff. But just doesn't quite have the length and plays really well inside, and his ability to um, yeah, his ability to get guys turned, to get, the lateral agility necessary to succeed in a zone scheme, I think will be elite. And again, he's a guy that has some of the traits where if you needed to move him outside, like if, an Abe Lucas gets hurt and you need a right tackle that can play, you can slide him over and have him play that position and do well. The only concern I would have with that is I don't really like his kick slide, and his ability to get out against speed rushers. But that's why one of the things I'm moving him inside for is allow him to just have the guy in front of him, get his hands on him, and then wash him out of the play or seal him. And I think he would be a great guard, which is weird because now we've mentioned 4 Georgia players as interior offensive linemen in the same draft, and I think he's going to go, somewhere like 4th round type of player. So that's always a good range if you can get a starter.
I'll give you a couple players I really like for me in this draft that I think Seattle would have on their radar in the 4th round. One is Luke Kandra, the offensive guard from Cincinnati, 6'4", 315 pounds. He would be like the player that I think Mike McDonald would want most out of this draft class on his team, to create an identity of being physical and still has the ability to get outside and do your stretch zone stuff. But when he does have the opportunity to knock you around as an offensive prospect, he's a road grading run blocker. He's bulldozes for ball carriers. He finishes well. He's played quite a number of snaps without missing a game. So he's going to be there. The availability is there. He's pass pro is really good. His football IQ is great. I like him a lot. I don't know why he's not graded higher, just from watching him and then reading about him. And I'm really curious as to how he performs at the combine. I think he's going to be one of those workout warriors. He's got a good body. He's got high upside agility, all that kind of stuff. I'm just very curious to see him. And then a player that Seattle really liked at the Senior Bowl was Jackson Slater, the offensive guard.
So that was the next guy I was going to talk about. Yeah.
Yeah, they met with him twice there at the Senior Bowl. They really like him.
He went to school in Bellevue, Washington. That's where he played high school. He was an athlete at Newport High School, but he grew up in Bellevue, and then went to Sac State. And I mean, that's kind of a smaller school, and he's not that SEC blue chip, all of that, but 6'4", 316-pound mauler with great feet, who I think will be extremely good in a zone blocking scheme. I wouldn't put him in a pure gap power scheme. I don't think that's setting him up to be successful, but as a guy that I like the way he plays. He's mean. He just finishes his blocks. He plays past the whistle. He's just got that attitude. You can tell this is a person that loves football. He's not in it to, make a bunch of money. He's going to make a bunch of money, but that's not his motivation. He just loves the game. And I love guys that just love football. And the Seahawks met with him twice, and that's got to say something right there. Like, they met with them, they talked to them. They're like, we want to ask this guy some more questions. Let's go talk with him again.
Yeah. And he's probably going to go in the 5th or 6th round just because he's from, Sacramento State?
Yeah. Sac State.
And he's played against teams like Portland State and all that kind of stuff, similar areas of the draft. There's 2 other players. Connor Colby from Iowa, I think, is a player that fits the scheme really well. The lateral agility and the zone blocking, all that kind of stuff is a strength of his. And then the last player I had to talk about was Clay Webb, another small school guy, Jacksonville State, 6'3", 310, elite pass protection, good run blocker, good IQ to diagnose schemes in front of him and stuff. So, these guys are going to be later because they play at smaller schools and just don't have the experience.
They don't have the tape against quality competition, so it's more of a projection when you're looking at the skills.
They're at places like Sacramento State and Webb State and Jacksonville State for a reason. They weren't highly recruited. But these players do exist that do well in the NFL if given an opportunity. So,
there is a guy that I'm intrigued with. Not that I want Seattle to draft him, because I really don't, but I just am very interested to see if he gets drafted and where he goes. Willie Lampkin. He's 5'10", 290 pounds.
Yeah.
He's severely undersized, but
yeah,
if you go and you kind of look at his tape and whatever, he's a center, and he has that
he's kind of a dog.
He's got that quick twitch, like explosiveness that you would expect more from a defensive lineman. Like, this is a guy that you'd expect to be your 5-tech defensive lineman, but he's lining up on the offensive line. And his feet are good. His technique is outstanding.
How do you hold up in the NFL?
I don't know.
Like, I just don't even know.
Like, he's 2 inches shorter, but he is essentially a more athletic Oluwatimi. A guy that is just massively undersized, but is really technical. And I'm just curious to see where he ends up.
Mm-hmm. Well, I tell you what, this could be an interesting option for Seattle if he's in the 7th round kind of range. And the reason I say that, and I didn't write anything about him, but I did study him. I've looked at him before. I've read about him. The cool thing about him, so beyond all the football IQ and his, the technician stuff that you'd mentioned, the road grader mentality, like, he's a vicious fighter, like, dude. Like, if he was in a cage, he would be a guy that you'd fear because he just moves like a wild animal. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing about his physicality and his size and his agility is, I think Seattle would be interested in him as having him on the roster as kind of a backup guy that can play guard or center, but also as a fullback.
Yeah. They have mentioned that they want a fullback. Option.
Yeah.
He would also be an interesting player to have as if you go back to when the Seahawks used to run out of 6th offensive linemen, because of his ability to move in space and that kind of stuff. Like, he would be interesting in that kind of role. Yeah. I mean, it's he's really interesting. I don't know if he makes it as an NFL pro and doesn't end up in Canada, or
I don't know if he's going to make it, right?
Or that just because of the size, but it's like, man, dude, if you'd grown 2 more inches, I could almost guarantee you're getting drafted and having a career.
Yeah, he's got that wrestling background. He's a football player, right? He's just one of those tough warriors. We drafted a fullback once named Schmidt. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the first plays I remember that he played on special teams for Seattle, he broke his nose because he just put his head in there and like, as a battering ram kind of a player. And he reminds me of a player like that just puts his body on the line every play and has a reckless abandon about him. And those players are kind of fun and endearing, but do you spend draft capital on a guy like that? I'm not so sure. I mean, maybe it's a priority free agent. You bring him into camp, you see if there's anything there, and maybe shock you at just how tenacious a player like that is, and you can't not have him on your roster. That would be fascinating to me, but I'm not sure if you're going to.
Yeah, I mean, you could also
round or whatever.
If you're 7th round pick, so it's basically like, you're looking at a guy that, like, okay, we could wait and try and sign him in. After the draft, but let's use this, 7th round pick on him just to make sure he's in our camp. because he'll, partly set the tone, and he'll like increase the energy of the competition in camp, even if he's not,
Yeah.
it just
I'm
makes
telling
everybody
there's
better.
there's a guy, I can't remember. There's a fullback guy that's going to reach free agency this year. And I can't remember what his name is off the top of my head, but he's like a 300, close to 300 pounds. And I can't remember where he's coming from, but he was a Pro Bowler, this last year. And this guy, to me, could potentially be a fallback, third center on your roster, but really he's there for special teams and being your fullback in this thing, because they're going to have a fullback on the roster. I mean, Kubiak has said that out loud. And so I just don't know what they're going to look for with that. If they're going to try to find a scheme diverse guy that's going to do a jack of all trades thing where he's going to play a position, but it's not going to be a primary. You're never going to see him on the field. He's just going to be a special teams guy and a fullback. Or if they want a dedicated fullback that has upside as far as athletic ability that could actually make plays for you from that position, similar to the fullbacks we've had in the past on the roster. Like
guy you're thinking of is Patrick Ricard out of Baltimore.
Yes. Right. So do they want a Patrick Ricard? If they do, maybe this is the guy. I don't know. He'd certainly be cheap and would, he's going to take up a back end spot on your roster, but they're going to have that guy anyway. So they might as well have a guy like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just don't expect him to, run away from everyone if you have a fullback screen.
Yes. So that's it. I mean, that's really it in a nutshell. We've talked about a few prospects. We'll probably talk about again when we talk about the tackle position group when we get there.
We could have talked about another 30 or 40 guys too.
Yeah, there are a lot of guys. A lot of guys.
It's a position that, every NFL team carries somewhere between 9 and 11 offensive linemen at all times. And so there's a lot of guys. And you need bodies, you need players. And it's just been a area of deficiency for the Seahawks for quite a while. They've just let the offensive line kind of decay out from underneath them. They went and got Cross and Lucas that one year, but other than that, they just haven't invested in the offensive line in quite some time. And that's something that they have to address. And John Snyder knows it. And he admitted it, that they've let it go too long.
All of that, for sure. So depending on the timing of when we get together again and record, we may be doing the tackle position group as we do the draft prospect series that we're currently doing, or we might be pivoting and covering the combine and kind of previewing that. And it might be both this week. We haven't talked about schedules, and so I'm not sure exactly where we're at with that, but one of those two shows will be coming up next, and then combine stuff, which is fascinating. We haven't even gotten to the defensive stuff yet on the prospect shows that we're doing, but it's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a lot of fun. I love this time of the year because there's just one thing after another. You had Senior Bowl, now you're going to have the combine, then free agency comes a couple weeks after that, and pretty soon you're just in it. You're in it.
Yeah, and you're doing pro days for college teams, and getting more information from there. And yeah, it's fun stuff. The draft comes at us fast.
Yeah. All right, let's get out of here. Find Keith on Blue Sky at Myers NFL. You can find me at NW Seahawk. The show is Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Find us on your favorite podcast platform and our YouTube channel. Hit subscribe, share it, like it, love it, whatever you want to do. And we'll see you next time. So take care, guys. Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.